For more than 30 years, Sean Combs was untouchable. A billionaire, a hit maker, the man who turned a record label into an empire and turned himself into one of the most powerful figures in music history. Then, in the summer of 2025, a jury sat down in a Manhattan courtroom and watched a few minutes of grainy hotel hallway footage. And the empire was over. The trial of Sean Combs produced almost 2 months of testimony, dozens of witnesses, accusations most people could barely believe were being made about someone so famous. Lawyers on both sides argued every detail. But when it was finally finished, legal analysts watching the case agreed on one thing. There was a single piece of evidence the defense could never explain away. It did more damage than any witness on the stand, any closing argument, any expert opinion. To understand why, and why this one piece of footage essentially ended Diddy's career as he knew it, you have to go back to where the case actually started. In September 2024, Sean Combs, the man the world knew as Diddy, was arrested in Manhattan. The charges did not come from a tabloid, and they did not come from a private lawsuit. They came from the United States federal government. Prosecutors had brought a serious indictment: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution under a federal law called the Mann Act. Those charges, taken together, painted a picture of something much bigger than one man behaving badly. They described, in the prosecution's words, a criminal enterprise built around the lifestyle of one of the most famous men in the music industry. Combs was held in a federal detention center in Brooklyn. He was denied bail, and the case moved toward trial faster than almost anyone expected. His trial began in May 2025 in the Federal District Court in Lower Manhattan, in front of Judge Aaron Subramanian. The prosecution's opening was simple and brutal. They described a man who, in their own words, used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. The defense answered with the only argument they really had, that the relationships at the center of the case had been consensual. Volatile, maybe. Complicated, maybe. But not criminal. Between those two completely opposite stories sat 12 jurors and a mountain of evidence. The heart of the prosecution's case came down to one witness above all others. Her name was Cassandra Ventura, known professionally as Cassie, the singer who had dated Sean Combs for roughly a decade. For days, she sat in the witness box and described their relationship from the inside. She testified about what prosecutors called freak-offs, long, drug-fueled sexual encounters, that the indictment described in detail. She described control. She described violence. She described a pattern she said had gone on for years, behind the closed doors of hotel rooms and private homes, while the world outside kept treating Sean Combs as the king of an industry. Her testimony was detailed. It was emotional. It was, in many ways, the spine of the entire prosecution. But here is the thing about testimony, no matter how powerful it is still. In the end, one person's word about what happened, and the defense's entire strategy hinged on making the jury doubt that word. They suggested mixed motives. They pointed to inconsistencies. They reminded the jury, again and again, that they were hearing one side of a complicated story. And for a while, for a real uncomfortable stretch of the trial, that strategy actually had a chance of working. Then the prosecution played the tape. It was hotel security footage. The date on it was 2016. The location was a hallway, the kind of hallway in any high-end hotel anywhere in the world. There was no audio, no music, no voiceover, just a fixed camera pointed at a corridor. And what it showed could not be argued with. The footage showed Sean Combs in that hallway, and it showed him being violent toward Cassie Ventura, kicking her, dragging her. There was no narration to color what the jury was seeing. There was no cross-examination of a memory. There was no competing version of events being offered up by a defense lawyer. The jury simply sat and watched the event happen, second by second, with their own eyes. That was the moment the entire case shifted. Because a defense team can do many things in a courtroom. They can challenge a witness's recollection. They can question her motives. They can pick apart. They can put doubt into every sentence. What they cannot do, what no defense in the world can do, is argue with video. They cannot cross-examine a camera. They cannot suggest the hallway misremember the event. And in the days that followed, Sean Combs' own lawyers made one of the most striking admissions of the entire trial. In their closing argument, the lead defense attorney essentially told the jury in plain language that they owned the domestic violence. They were not denying it. They could not deny it. The tape had already shown it to 12 people. The only argument the defense had left was that violence was not the same as the federal crimes the government had charged. But by then, something had already shifted in that courtroom, and everybody in it knew it. On the 2nd of July, 2025, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict, and it was a split decision. They acquitted Sean Combs of the most serious charges. Not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of the sex trafficking counts. On those, the prosecution had not convinced them beyond a reasonable doubt. The headlines, briefly, were full of the word acquitted, but the jury was not done. On 2 counts, transportation to engage in prostitution, under the Mann Act, they returned a guilty verdict. Combs was now a convicted federal felon. The judge, Aaron Subramanian, then made another critical decision. He denied bail. After everything the jury had heard, after the tape, the judge ruled that Sean Combs continued to be a danger. He would remain behind bars until sentencing. That sentencing came in October 2025. The prosecution asked for more than 11 years. The defense asked for 14 months, essentially time already served. The judge sat in the middle, but well above what the defense wanted. He sentenced Sean Combs to 50 months in federal prison, a $500,000 fine, 5 years of supervised release. And he made it clear in his own remarks that he believed the sentence reflected not only the conviction, but the pattern of abuse the trial had revealed. The man who once stood at the very top of the music industry was sent to a federal prison in New Jersey. Step back from all of it, and the lesson of this trial is the kind that lawyers will teach for years. A trial is not a search for the truth in the way most people imagine it. A trial is a contest over what a jury can be made to doubt. Witnesses can be challenged. Memories can be questioned. Motives can be reframed. Documents can be reinterpreted. Almost every piece of evidence is something a smart defense can try to chip away at. But a video is different. A video does not have a motive. A video does not contradict itself on the stand. A video does not need a translator. The 2016 hotel footage did not just support Cassie Ventura's account of who Sean Combs really was. It made the jury feel it in their own bodies, watching a man they had only known as a celebrity behave like the man the indictment had described. It turned an accusation into a fact. And once a jury has seen something with their own eyes, no closing speech in the world can unsee it. That is the difference between testimony and proof. That is why prosecutors fight so hard to get visual evidence in front of juries, and why defendants fear it more than any witness. Of everything in those long weeks of trial, all the testimony and arguments and expert witnesses, it was a few minutes of silent hallway footage that did the real damage. The empire was built on image, and in the end, it was an image one no one was ever meant to see that brought it down. But the criminal trial was only the first front of Sean Combs' legal war. There is a second front, quieter, slower, and potentially far more costly, and that battle is just getting started. because there is a long line of civil lawsuits still waiting for him on the other side of his prison sentence, and those could cost him more than the prison ever will. We break that down in a later video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.